The massive fires in Australia may be under control, but anger from the summer still simmers.
Tell the truth!
A scorched countryside and an ecological disaster, rallying thousands to march on all of the capital cities. The masses blasting the lack of action on the worsening climate crisis and demanding change.
The youth are rising! No more compromising!
But the conservative political leadership here continues to downplay the threat of climate change.
We cannot control the natural disaster, but what we can do is control our response.
We've been talking about these issues about climate change and extreme events and what the future's going to be looking like for decades, for longer than I've been researching, or maybe even longer than I've been alive, and it seems like it's falling on deaf ears. I find that really frustrating, and it's, kind of heartbreaking to see that they're still not taking it seriously.
Australians are quite divided on climate change. I think it's been made political, particularly by lobby groups that have either lobby for keeping things as they are, business as usual, but also groups that sow a lot of doubt about whether climate change is even real.
Our own Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, doesn't want to go because he doesn't care about the beautiful place we call home.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison has been the target of much of the criticism.
You're not welcome.
I understand the very strong feelings people have. They've lost everything.
I think that recently there has been a lot of criticism of the Prime Minister for not taking leadership, and he went on holiday during one of the crucial times for the fires, and I think people link that rightly or wrongly to him perhaps not caring about what's happening with climate change.
In Australia, which historically has not been aligned with those sort of climate change denying petrostates, finds itself currently with a prime minister who denies that climate change is real and has done everything to actually block progress in acting on climate.
They're coming halfway to the table. They're admitting that there's a problem, but they're still refusing to fix the long-term solution. A lot of it comes down to, but the economy. The economy and coal, that's what it comes down to. Oh, we'll lose too many jobs.
Coal is a pillar of the Australian economy. It's mined in every state in the country, more than 500 million tons of it in 2018. And Australia is the world's largest exporter, raking in $46 billion. Coal supplies almost a quarter of the world's primary energy, but it's burned to do so, and as a result, generates 40% of the fossil fuel emissions around the globe.
The coal emissions, the industrialisation of coal production is a problem. It is definitely adding to the overall atmospheric carbon load.
Coal and serious climate change action simply cannot coexist.
The division really is today about the climate change versus the economy.
This is coal. Don't be afraid.
The
Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on crops.
It's coal.
Fossil fuels are a really important part of our economies, and so that really does affect the politics. So they're often walking this sort of tightrope between listening to people's concern, but also thinking about, am I doing the right thing for the economy?
Mr. Speaker, those opposite have an ideological, pathological fear of coal.
But the longer Australia's economy relies on coal production, the worse it makes its own climate crisis. Some estimate that the cost of climate change will near $27 billion annually by 2050, the same as the country's defense budget currently.
The impacts of climate change that we're seeing because we haven't acted sufficiently is already far greater than the cost of action.
In Canberra, we've had huge disruptions just because of the smoke. Businesses were closed for days on end. It affected people's health. I don't think it's an option for us to not do anything.
With so much money at stake, there's plenty of sources helping fuel climate disinformation.
Sometimes, the media's a bit divided. Some newspaper groups are sort of saying, even questioning whether climate change exists, because it means for many that things are going to have to change. Those things are actually dangerous because ultimately you're not protecting the population of your country.
Climate change denialism was on full display during these blazes. Arson falsely being played up as the main instigator.
These things have sort of been fact-checked since and shown to be, quite exaggerated.
It's really lightning strikes.
What do you think the rest of the world should learn from what's happened to you guys here in Australia?
Climate change is real. Everybody that's denying it stands to make a profit from it. Isn't that obvious?
Australians can be very stubborn. It's really the education of the Australian public.
We listen to experts for almost anything else, right? When our car breaks down, we go to an expert to have it fixed. When we are sick, we go to a doctor who's trained, so why not believe the experts when it comes to climate change?
But there are growing signs the conversation may be substantially changing.
There's a level of awareness about climate change that I think is unprecedented.
People are starting to wake up a bit more.
The whole period that we've just encountered the last 2 months in Australia is against a backdrop of this politicisation of the science and debate about whether climate change played a role. And while that's happening, people are losing their homes. And one positive of this, I think, is people just moving on and making progress, taking action into their own hands and really showing what can be done in the absence of political leadership.
The type of heat and the type of fires that we saw in Australia are starting to change people's minds that may have been undecided about climate change or didn't believe in climate change. I think there's still a long way to go.
Australia will never be the same after this. I have never seen such a strong response from so many people over such a prolonged period. That's people wanting something to happen on climate change, from the media to the average person in the street.
This may be a turning point for them. This may be a tipping point where the impacts have become so pervasive, these almost apocalyptic wildfires. It's sort of raised awareness in Australia here.
Skeptics are getting less airtime. It seems to be that, people at least noticing that something's not right.
Right here, right now, is where we draw the line.
And the political landscape of climate change isn't only changing in Australia.
Climate change is here, it's real. We have to mitigate for it, meaning we have to stop polluting the atmosphere with carbon dioxide emissions, and we also have to start adapting.
The conversation is changing here in South Florida too, and across the country.
The conversation is changing rapidly. When I got to Congress in 2015, Republicans did not even want to utter those words, climate and change, together. Today, Republicans are starting to take this seriously, and that's good news for anyone who wants to get this solved. Two big factors. Number one, the science. Every day it's more compelling. Every day this is less of a debate. And then the other thing that has changed are the politics. This young generation of millennials that are starting to register to vote, they all want to see the government address climate change and the environment in a meaningful way. Republicans are starting to feel that pressure and they're starting to react. We have to understand it's not going to be solved overnight, and we have to celebrate every step of progress along the way.
But not everyone is as optimistic. The United States is withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement and rolling back many climate regulations.
Unfortunately, the current administration has shown no interest in acting on climate change or even in working with our international partners to solve this problem. Instead, Trump has filled his administration with fossil fuel and energy lobbyists.
Well, the president has certainly used rhetoric that contradicts, counters any effort to meaningfully address carbon pollution. Even the most prominent denialist, which has been the president, is starting to evolve on this issue. He got behind an initiative to plant 1 trillion trees around the world. We all need to create a political environment that encourages both sides to meet in the middle and start making some real significant progress in this space.
We need the United States and Australia and all of the players to come to the table. At some point we have to ask, what is it going to take to finally get our policymakers to do something about this problem? How bad are we willing to let it get?
This is probably the biggest challenge that humanity has ever faced. This is not a political issue, this is a human issue, and we all have to solve it.